Welcome to another episode of Justice. It is the space where self-care, wellness, and social justice meet at a big age.
Episode 3.
Episode 3. I'm Tashira Halyard of Politics and Fashion.
I'm Margo Lindauer of Nothing.
of Justice.
Of Justice. Of MargoLindauer.com.
Period.
And welcome to our episode. This is going to be another really interesting one where we're going to be talking about power and accountability.
Absolutely.
And how we can accomplish those things even if we don't believe in the carceral system. Or maybe we're an abolitionist, or maybe we're just trying to figure out what that means to us.
Exactly. It's about how we have a restorative justice approach, I think, to things that happen in our world, especially when women are being victimized.
Yep. And when men continue to minimize that
victimization
Yeah,
and the
the
violence. Absolutely.
Wine Press is our sponsor for today. Jody and Aaron Mehta. Wine Press is a BIPOC and women-owned business. And our drink of the day, let's talk about it, is a white wine from South Africa, a Chenin Blanc, a medley of freshly whipped honey, bosked pears, and beeswax. This is a great example of South African Chenin. I might be mispronouncing that, but it sounds fancy. It's bone dry and great for food. Cheers.
Cheers, friend. These glasses are beautiful as well.
Thank you. My father-in-law got them for us. It's really sweet.
Oh, yeah, this is good. This is my speed with wine.
I like it.
But you're a red?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm a white. I'm a Chardonnay and a Chenin person for sure.
Oh, Chenin. Why didn't you just tell me what it was? I was saying like Chenin.
Because I don't know how to say it either, so I just know I like it.
Chenin. It's like chenille.
Yeah, I like fancy things, and so whatever it is.
Whatever it is.
That's
Chenin,
great.
Chenin, chenille. Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you to our sponsors.
Thank you, Wine Press.
Down at Wine Press.
Okay, let's jump in. Dumb shit men say.
Dumb shit men say. Here we go. This one is by the DeSantis of Ron, the governor of Florida, who said this: "We can't just stay idly by while woke ideology ravages every institution in our society. We must fight the woke in our schools. We must fight the woke in our businesses. We must fight the woke in government agencies. We can never, ever surrender to woke ideology. And I'll tell you this, the state of Florida is where woke goes to die." What the entire fuck?
He said that.
What is he talking about, Margo?
He's talking about saying gay.
That makes you woke? That, I guess. Did he just learn what woke meant? Or what he thinks it means? Because
I think it's what
he still doesn't know what it means.
I don't think
someone who wrote this thinks they know what it means.
They are claiming that anything people say that's not him is woke.
Well, let me just...
Or maybe, I don't know.
Well, let me just say this too, and I could be wrong, but if we go to the etymology of woke being used in this context, which, by the way, is incorrect, as I've said, it feels also like a tinge of cultural appropriation, which is why he got it wrong, right? That's not you don't even know what that word means. For someone to be woke is for them to have a higher level of consciousness, for them to care about the world. Maybe they're eating great. Maybe they're aware of the history of the U.S. imperial colonial empire. It can mean a lot. It can be a little hotep. It can mean a lot of things.
Right.
But this is not.
But what is he even saying?
My problem is how these people are dog whistling in a way that is using broad strokes, which I assume they have to, right?
It's also very powerful.
You're putting every gay, trans,
black,
brown, abortion,
women,
every life experience,
abuse
is under woke,
except marriage, Christian,
for sure,
baby.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mortgage, house,
nuclear family, white picket fence.
Church, state.
Well, let me tell you something. They got to fight it in the government agencies because the state of Florida is where woke goes to die. And I say people, as someone who is from Florida, and I rep hard from where I'm from a very rural place, Bartow, Florida. We always just say Polk County because the city is so small. Everything is done county-wide, right? And so when I was 19 years old, I came home from college and saw the Klan marching down the
so
main
sorry.
street in our town. And, at 40, I certainly was not raised in the Jim Crow South as my grandparents were. So to see the Klan marching down and, racism this very visual and visceral way, I think is not something that many people our age can say, right? But DeSantis and others are the proxy, the vestiges of that visual representation of white supremacy. They just don't have on a hood. I feel like in many ways, that type of racism is almost more insidious because we don't see it, right? It's hidden behind these types of talking points.
Right.
When in some ways, I just want you to put on a hood so I can know what I'm dealing with.
Right. I also think it's to your point that when people are fighting for their own self autonomy and that's being umbrellaed under woke or like against the grain or like neoliberal, right? It's just erasing all of the points of their identity.
Oh, for sure. Intentionally.
Intentionally, right? So
Right.
it's like I'm fighting for me just to be able to be safe. Not me, but like as if someone were.
If I was a Black trans woman living in Wichita, Kansas right now,
Correct.
I'm
I
fighting
just
not
want
to
to be
die.
myself and be safe and be able to go food shopping.
Exactly.
And they're saying, don't be woke. What does that even
What does that even mean? I don't know. We have talked before in previous episodes about how we are in a very, very scary time. And I think these politicians are just reminding us of the amount of work that we have to do.
The one thing that gives me hope, though, in this kind of context is I think what you said in the last episode of like the octopus and the tentacles kind of like regenerating in different ways was very kind of impactful for me. I also see it as like them throwing everything against the wall and seeing what sticks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the other reasons that they're freaking out so hard is that a younger generation is coming up and is not going to put up with this
At all.
And those are kids from Polk County.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Those
which
are
makes me happy.
Those are children from Wichita, Kansas. I mean, I not to say that they're not confronting racism and xenophobia and anti-trans rhetoric. For sure that still exists in a really profound and painful way, but there's also a lot of beautiful things happening in communities that would have never had openly
Yeah.
gay or trans or kind of kids who identify as different.
Yeah, I mean, so we've given them something to be afraid of. So I guess in that way, it also is kind of a victory, right? Like a lot of this just fear mongering that's happening now is because, as we have said before, our movement had gains. It has had gains. Those of us who have a socio-political analysis that's more aligned on the left, our movement has had gains. And I think they're still there. They're still happening, especially on the state and local level, which is where I think organizing can be the most impactful.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
Yeah. And so to have politicians spewing the rhetoric that they are now is I think is out of fear.
I do too.
Yeah. So that gives us
so
hope.
I think it's kind of TBD, but this is atrocious.
Yeah, yes. Very much so. So state of Florida, we have you in our prayers.
Yes, we do. And we'll keep talking about it.
Absolutely.
So I think, not a non sequitur, but not something totally related. Our episode today is talking about power and when people in power do bad things and how we hold them accountable in ways that fulfill the needs of those who've been harmed, but also the needs of those who've harmed. Because we know that hurt people hurt people.
For sure.
We also know that people in power wield a lot of power and can use that power for really nefarious gains. And that it's really scary and sometimes impossible to hold people in power accountable. I think there have been so many examples of this on the big and smaller scale, right? Like we can talk about Trump, right? We can talk about Harvey Weinstein. We can talk about Epstein, right? There are all these people who've held so much power and harmed so many people. And one could argue from both sides whether justice has been served. And what is justice in this context, right? Harvey Weinstein is currently in jail. Epstein. Harvey Weinstein is in jail. Epstein killed himself or was killed. His girlfriend is now in jail. And whether jail is justice. I think there's a whole conversation about that.
For sure.
They're kind of on a more local level to kind of community organizing in Boston. There's two people that come to mind who've kind of allegedly harmed people. One is Adam Foss, who, for those who don't know, was a former prosecutor and very kind of TED Talk famous progressive organizer around progressive prosecution and has been alleged to have harmed many women. Currently in Boston, right this moment, we're recording September 1st. Our elections are September 6th. There are two Democratic candidates for district attorney in Suffolk County, which is Boston. And Ricardo Arroyo allegedly sexually assaulted two young women during high school. And that just came out in the news. And he's denying that it ever happened. One of the victims has come forward and said it absolutely happened. And there are people from both sides claiming that it was a political hit job, and then other people saying that how could someone who allegedly did this ever even become a lawyer, because he, on his bar application, never said he was subject of an investigation. Now clearly he was. And so there's just so many examples. And I think we need to talk about it because it's so hard and complicated and multi-leveled.
And let's just say also acknowledge the work of Tarana Burke and others.
Yes.
That
Thank you.
For us to even be having this conversation took a movement, took generations of work for us to be able to, it's sad to say, but to account the ways in which these men have caused harm and behaved in a violent way, because there was a time where it was just considered to be normal. I mean, in many ways it still is.
Well, I mean, I think it absolutely is still normal. I think people talking about it
is what's new.
Is what's new.
I remember Margo being fresh out of college. Maybe I was like 21, 22 years old. And I was working at a law firm in downtown Atlanta, white male owned and operated. And I was being sexually harassed pretty badly. Like, one of the partners was taking pictures of me. One of the partners came behind me one day and looked down my shirt and like shook my shoulders. And I mean, I remember one time, one partner called another partner and was like, look, I just got back from Las Vegas. I got the best blowjob of my life. This is what he's saying. And the other partner has the door open and I'm sitting right there. And he goes to recount his sexual experiences and how he was going to get him a blowjob too. All this to say, I come home and I tell my mom, I can't work here anymore. I don't think I knew that I was being sexually harassed or what that really meant, but I knew something was wrong and I wasn't supposed to be treated that way at work, right? I remember I even called up this judge I knew, thinking that maybe I needed some legal advice. Like, I didn't know, just knew I was not being treated appropriately. And my mom says, that's just what happens when you go to work. That's just what happens when you go to work. Now, as an adult, and as probably about my mom's age when that happened to me, because my mom had me when she was very young, right? I can hold grace and know that she can't give me what she don't got. And so she truly believed that.
Right, because those were her experiences.
Those were her, and that infuriates and saddens me, because you always want what's best for your children. And in her mind, what was best for her was to tell me to just put my head down
and keep working.
And just keep working. And one day, Margo, I got in my car on my lunch break and I never went back.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I never went back.
I'm so sorry you experienced that.
And so, thank you. But I'm definitely stronger for it and definitely have different expectations of how I will be treated by anybody. but especially in a place of employment. And I think there's something for sure around these men that you have named, because a lot of the abuse is happening within proxy of an already imbalanced relationship.
I also think it's so interesting and hard because people don't want to name people who we think of as change makers,
Yeah.
right? So we know that everyone has lots of different parts of their personality, but we so desire as a society to hold people up, right? That like there's one person that is the example of everything. But it's just not like that. And when they fail really badly because there's no grace.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the community fails.
The community
The,
fails
the
when we
community has
hold people
already
up.
failed.
When we hold people up and turn a blind eye to problematic behavior
Yeah.
and then act shocked.
Let me tell you something. So, I have had the pleasure of sitting among indigenous communities and just hearing wisdom from different tribal nations across the country. And I remember being in a juvenile justice meeting, and they were one group was explaining a youth diversion program that they had. And they said whenever a young person commits an act that may be considered a misbehavior or criminal, they sit the family down, and before they address the child, they say, "Who has failed this child?" To the adults. Because something has gone wrong if your child is doing these things. If your child is out the house at midnight and breaking into homes, if your child's not going to school, that's not about that child. The community should be held responsible. And similarly, I think the same thing about us, whether it is on a macro or a micro level, who has failed?
But what do we do when there's I agree, but I'm interested in hearing like what does that look like?
Yeah. To hold someone accountable or to name the failure.
Both. Like you have a man that has potentially coerced or harmed dozens,
Yeah.
hundreds
Yeah.
of women
Yeah.
who've been in less like interns, people that he supervised. I'm talking about Adam Foss here.
Yeah.
Right, but just as an example, like there are lots of people in this position.
Of course.
Right? How do you hold someone like that accountable? I don't know. I don't believe it's the carceral system, but
I think
I don't know. I mean,
like what is it, right?
what is it?
So I've seen examples in the movement for Black Lives in DC, whether it be more like traditional well-known groups or others. And a lot of it tends to start from a place of accountability on social media. And I don't know how I feel about that. I think it's probably generational
Yeah.
for sure
It
because
also, is that like cancel culture?
Yes. I think that it is part and parcel of cancel culture, which I don't like. I think that in order for someone to truly be held accountable, you have to call them in, not out, especially if it is someone who has been a part of a certain value system, right? This is someone, in the case of Adam Fox, who was a prosecutor, right? I mean, so he knows what is right and wrong in the eyes of the law, yet he is committing crimes. So how do you call someone like that who should have the value system?
Well, it's also,
in?
I mean, he would argue, and I think, we're all lawyers here,
That they
that-
were adults.
that they were adults and he didn't commit a crime. What would you argue about someone in a position of power sleeping with interns? Or allegedly giving people STIs knowing they had an STI.
Yeah.
Knowingly.
It's so interesting because I think that
These are all allegations, by the way.
Of course.
So
these are all allegations.
and I guess the reason we bring this person up in particular is one, he's now subject of an actual criminal prosecution in New York, but also someone who both Tashira and I have intersected with professionally.
Yes. If I can be completely transparent, I think a lot of this work obviously rests on the shoulders of cishet men to not be abusers and to perpetuate violence. But I also think there is work to be done among us because in the case of Adam and others, there's this particular charisma that they have, right? There's this attractiveness. And this is likely how abusers work, right? They draw you in a particular way. R. Kelly, very true, right? Between the music and the personality and the fame and the success and the money. And what begins to happen is that it is other women, because of the ways that we have been victimized and conditioned, that keep the whole thing going.
Well, in the case of R. Kelly, also parents.
Absolutely. 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 And so when the whole community will come out to support the perpetrator and not the victims, right? The question is, what does accountability look like? And I think that the reason we cannot answer that question is because we don't have community in a real way in this society. I think we have been, I mean, this is what post industrial, deregulated, privatized capitalism makes you do. It makes you very individually focused. Maybe you have the nuclear family, but you don't have extended family and you don't have community any longer. And so, when harms are done, we don't see ourselves in that other person because we're so hyper focused on the individual. And I think that's what keeps us from truly adopting a model of justice that is restorative.
And what does restorative justice mean to you in that context, I
Yeah.
guess?
For me it is, and obviously this is also a term of art that I'm not as like well versed in, but from a very high level, it means that there are ways to hold folks accountable and for victims to feel like they have received justice that is outside of incarceration and purely punishment. It is about accountability. It involves mediation. It can involve a very individualized kind of approach to what the victim wants to be done in a
And
particular
particularly
situation
related to their safety.
and related to their safety. But you know much more, especially as a domestic
No,
violence
I
advocate.
mean, it's something that I've been thinking about a lot, particularly over the last couple of years, because I've questioned a lot of parts of our judicial system, particularly over the last, I would say, 5 years. Many things work well and other things don't work well. And one big gap has been restorative justice and listening to survivors and listening to what they want to see. And most of my clients, I would say, want to be safe and want an apology.
So they don't want jail time or
I mean,
incarceration.
some do, but most don't. And most don't get jail time. I mean, that's the other like hypocrisy or like fallacy of our system, that domestic violence and sexual assault crimes, for the most part, are charged, at least in Massachusetts, are charged as misdemeanors. And most misdemeanors don't end up in jail time. So most of the cases that I worked on, even with very serious allegations, serious allegations of domestic violence or sexual assault, very rarely ended up in jail time.
Wow.
Very rarely. I mean, I can count probably on over the last 8 years of practice, maybe 6 of the defendants ended up in jail.
So I also want to just talk about this myth of she's making it up. It didn't happen. Let's talk about R. Kelly specifically from this perspective. I think
Why would anyone come forward and say the things that they said about someone or what they experienced for fame?
it is so sick, right? That is such an obvious analysis, in my opinion, that the fact that people would deny that lets me know that misogynoir is real, right? This
Can you explain what misogynoir is for people who don't know? Because I think it's a term that is relatively new, but so powerful.
it is an intersection of misogyny and racism that Black women experience in particular. So it is this idea that not only am I being victimized because I'm a woman, but also because I am Black.
Black woman.
A Black woman. And it really has its roots in Kimberly Crenshaw's work around intersectionality. And Kimberly Crenshaw is a law professor. It also is a great example of adultification bias that Black girls also experience, right? So R. Kelly's victims were
Children.
Black children. They were Black girls. So we have the intersection of racism, sexism, and adultification bias in believing that Black girls are more likely to know about sex, to have sex, to
Want
understand,
sex.
to want sex, right?
To want sex with an adult.
It's this idea that we're not children, right? We are never given the privilege of innocence. We're not children. We have always been adultified, and sex in this kind of like projection of promiscuity on us is one of the most blatant examples. It is the Jezebel stereotype that starts very, very young, right? And so when that happens, that's another reason why these abusers are not being held accountable, because they are picking a very particular type of victim. And I cannot believe that it took 20 plus years for
But
people to say
that's
you
wrong.
should not be abusing
But like
children.
R. Kelly, Harvey Weinstein, Epstein, it was all 15, 20 years. And people knew.
Yeah. Yeah. People knew. But you know what that makes me think about today too? Like to put a mirror up to us. What do we know about today that we ignore?
Climate change.
Now that's real. That shit is real. Cause I be at home like doo doo doo. That shit sounds sad. I can't deal with it today. Yes.
I think the jagged edges of mental health and recovery, that it's not linear. And so someone who's been impacted by harm or trauma, that they're going to be recovering from that for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely. And I think the way that we see substance abuse disorder in this society is something that hopefully 20, 30 years from now we'll have the compassion, the empathy, and the research to look at very differently. I think the opioid crisis has kind of began to shepherd that analysis, because in the 80s it was just crack.
Yeah. I think another thing that we turn a blind eye to is, and I hope it's okay for me to say this, but kind of how bad social media is for our mental health. Right? A lot of people will say like, oh, you know, it's not good for me to be on Instagram. It's not good for me to scroll. But we still do it.
Yeah. It's totally fine for you to say that.
Okay. I don't think it's bad to be on your account. I love your account so much. It is something that has been a wonderful thing that can have really negative consequences for some people.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I hear a lot of people talking about how bad it is, but don't do anything about it.
Because it is the way that we have understood to interact with the world. In the case of this man, it is the way that we have understood men and women interact with one another.
I would also like to say something about, I think all of these, well, not all of them. I don't know all of these perpetrators, but there's something about charisma that I think we need to unpack.
Girl.
Right? So,
girl.
R. Kelly, a beautiful, handsome, successful artist, talking about his pain and sex and love and dancing and okay, charismatic. You talk about people who are in kind of grassroots advocacy, who are like working for the community, who are holding people's like feelings and traumas. You talk about electeds, right, who represent people and represent all people, allegedly. There's something really, it's how we define charisma. I don't know if in other cultures we would define it differently, but there's something that we have exalted that makes those people untouchable.
Yeah,
it's only related to men, by the way.
Yeah, no, that is very true.
We don't talk about women being charismatic or dynamic.
And not being able to be held accountable because of those things, right? Like you could be a charismatic woman, but your ass still going to jail. You like, what does that have to do?
It also doesn't make you sexy.
It does not make you sexy at all. Yeah, because I've known many of people, but I can think of one in particular who is purely charismatic and is a major sex symbol, not because of any like sense of physical attraction, for sure. And obviously when money gets added into the dynamic, things get even more murky. I can say that in the case of the community organizer, I think having been in an abusive relationship with someone as an organizer who was also an organizer who was kind of like the leader of our group, or we were like this loosely affiliated organizations that kind of planted multiple organizations around the city. We had this political education class, and I ended up finding out that he had been cheating on me with multiple women who were part of our group, one of which was my best friend in the group. Girl. Um, one of which was my best friend in the group. We had just a very toxic relationship. And I think the reason that people were drawn to him was not because he was physically attractive. I am 100% positive that he struggled with not just substance abuse, but also like mental health issues. So he came across as very like Mr. Magoo, very like disheveled all the time.
Oh, interesting.
So,
So like women wanted to fix him or help him?
and then
Did he wash his balls?
he washed his balls.
Okay.
He did. Yeah. I was
Sorry,
happy.
I don't mean. Disheveled can take a lot of different.
I think that why people were attracted to him, why women were, was because he had the capacity to make us feel good about ourselves, right? He had the capacity to make us understand the world differently. He had this secret knowledge that he was I mean, in many ways this is also the
cult
traits
thing.
of a cult leader.
Right.
No one else understands the world like I do, and I'm putting you on to this very special secret, this very special
But was it
knowledge.
really special?
I can say not from him. I can say that I learned more about community organizing and critical race theory outside of law school than I did in law school,
Well,
right?
that's not
Much
surprising.
of my work and what I do today, my analysis was developed during my time with him and others that I was organizing with. So I will give that time period in my life that credit. I won't give him that credit, but I will give that time period in my life that credit. And I remember us going through things and him being physically abusive, me hitting him. There just being so much trauma and toxic shit. And nobody said anything. And I was always so shocked by that, Margo, because I'm like, we are in a room talking about Black liberation. We are in a room condemning white supremacy and racism. We are in a room talking about all these societal ills that have our people marginalized and oppressed. Yet, this person sitting across the table from me just put a fucking pillow over my face last night and tried to smother me. Where is the accountability? Like,
What does that look? What would
does
that have looked like for you?
I think for me, I always wanted him to get help. And I don't know if that's how I would feel today. But I remember one time he was throwing all my things outside.
I remember that.
You remember this? And two of my friends came over, and one of my very close friends who you know, Kendra, was like, why are we helping you pick your stuff up? Why are we not calling the police? Because you can't just throw somebody out their home, right? And I remember thinking, we don't call the police. We don't call the police. So if we don't call the police, what is it that we do? Which is why I honestly have had, as a victim, have had an issue at times, especially when I first learned about this concept in a real way, of abolition. Because I thought to myself, in that moment when I was getting put out and had nowhere to go and had no money and had to sleep in my friend's closet on an air mattress this thin for 3 months until I could get my life together and get my own place, absolutely somebody should have called the police on him. Absolutely, right? And it is hard for me today to reconcile that.
Yeah. But I think that's one of the things we're going to talk about. Because I wonder, or we should unpack, like, what would the police have done?
What would they even have done? At the very least, I think
You're right.
I
mean,
could have been in
Kendra-
my house.
Right. Right. But would that have been safe for you?
But would that have been safe?
I mean, I think Kendra's right and you're right. And there needs to be something else.
Always.
And I think that there has to be something else for victims who there is this murky area. Like you're a lawyer, right? And so there's this area where the criminal justice system isn't going to get justice for victims because to be prosecuted and convicted of a crime, you have to be proved guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a very, very high standard. It's a much higher standard than in any other area of law, for good reason, right? Because
For sure.
the
Dealing with someone's life, liberty.
right. Sex crimes in particular are the hardest to prosecute. And quite frankly, most prosecutors don't want to touch them because there's always a level of reason, or you and I might argue that there isn't reasonable doubt, but like there's always something that people can say brings reasonable doubt, whether it's a drink or an outfit or like fucked up shit that people use to make women seem either not credible or like they're lying. And so even cases that do go forward in the criminal justice system very rarely have an outcome where justice is served. And so we know the system isn't working for victims.
Yeah.
And we also know that 99% of people who are victimized don't use the criminal justice system.
Absolutely.
And so what can we do? It has to be there has to be something else.
Well, so I'll bring this full circle. Not at all a situation around abuse whatsoever. But I did try to go to community about another situation that happened in my relationship, right? And there was nothing. And I was welcomed with open arms by the two leaders that I called. I think they are great people, and I am happy that I had them to lean on in a way that I did not before, right? Because I was the leader then. I had no one to call. So I was grateful that I had a listening ear. I was grateful that they helped me to reframe what I was going through and to center myself at a time when I needed to hear it the most. But there was nothing, there was no process in place for me to go through and to have this harm dealt with. And what frustrated me the most is that the people who caused the harm didn't even believe that there was a need for a process. And I thought to myself, well, what are we doing? Are we trying to change the world or not? Because you can't show up down at the protest, turn on a camera.
Well, let's talk about that.
And think that's the work. This is what we're talking about today is the work.
And I think there's also this added aspect that we haven't mentioned yet, but it's important to talk about of performative behavior.
For sure.
For likes, for visual, for closeness to power without the work.
And also without the internal work. Because in the case of some of these people that we mentioned today, I mean, you can't believe in what you're talking about. Or maybe you do believe it, but you have done the work to reconcile your actions with your beliefs, right?
Or that only certain people are worthy.
That's the thing. I think that's the thing. I think that
like only men are worthy?
Yeah.
Or whatever, women aren't worthy. I don't know how to reconcile that.
Well, I also think in the case of Adam, right, we see it so clearly as there was something done wrong. But I think that it's quite possible that he does not.
Maybe. I'm sure. I mean, I know.
Yeah, and there are many people we know who think like him. So that is the work that needs to continue to be done. I think we talk about hope, right? So what is my hope for how we can reconcile this and the ways that people are being victimized by celebrities, by leaders, by community advocates? My hope is that we can start by creating real community, honestly.
And I think also that's my hope too. And my hope is also that we can create safe places for people to go where they can honestly express what they want. Like victims or people who have been harmed can honestly express what they want to see happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think community will hold that space.
I also think that there is a role, and I think you talked about this, but for like peer-on-peer accountability.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Active bystander.
Active bystander accountability. Do you remember that from college?
Yeah. That
people can intervene.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's not cool.
Don't
do that. Don't
treat this person like
why are you dating a 24-year-old when you're 50? Like, why are you cheating on your girlfriend so flagrantly? I don't know. I'm not talking about anyone specific, but I think there are opportunities for people who get passes constantly for reasons that I just really don't understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I don't think that we will ever understand because we're talking about cishet men, right? So we sit at many intersections and many margins, Margot. We have not been raised and conditioned to even have the expectation that we could behave in that way. I was raised to believe that I couldn't even walk out the house with a piece of hair that was like out of place because I was representing my entire community and my entire race. So can you imagine that if I thought that I could behave like this? So we will never understand the mindset of this type of abuser because we haven't been given the opportunity to see the world in that way.
And I also think there's another part of that's so true. That was not my experience, but I resonate deeply with that. That I was conditioned to never ever think about anything other than work when I went to work.
Mm.
So I remember like in jest joking with Josh one day, being like, I never think about sex during the workday. Ever. And he was like, really? It's like, never. And I just like never thought that was something I could think about during the workday because I was just like working.
It's like you had an avatar, right? You had a whole different person.
Like I'm working, I'm focused,
They ain't working. These people we talking about, I mean, they're working.
What are they doing?
They working. They ain't working.
Right? But like,
exactly.
But I also think that's conditioning. Like, I'm not saying that my approach to anything is right or wrong, but like, it's not appropriate to be having sex with people on the job in a workplace.
It's like people who you leverage a certain amount of power and influence over. I mean, that's just period. It doesn't matter.
It's unhealthy. It's scary. It's abusive.
No, we don't do that.
Don't be in that situation. Date outside. Like, there's lots. You're adults. I'm not saying like, but like when you bring it into the workplace, when you bring it into professionalism, when you bring young people to be your masseuses and fly them at age 14 to no.
It's so sick. And so you are referencing Epstein. And I should say that we've both been knee deep in this, all the documentaries, all the podcasts, etc. And one of the ones that I saw talked about how Ghislaine, the ex-girlfriend who is now incarcerated after facing her own charges, made a remark that these are trash people. They're throwaway people. Nobody wants them. No one cares because a lot of the girls came from, very poor environments in Palm Beach County. So again, there are layers there, and whether it be age, race, gender, or socioeconomic status, people choose their victims intentionally.
Yeah. I'm just going to say that we're going to link a few articles that I've been quoted in popular press that talk about kind of the targeting of vulnerable people to become victims. It's not a coincidence who Epstein and Ghislaine's victims were.
Absolutely.
And I would argue probably that Ghislaine is a victim herself. That doesn't mean she's not a perpetrator.
Because you can be both.
You can be both. And so there's so many different layers of conversations around utilizing and abusing power that I don't think we're having as a society that we need to start having. And so I'm hoping that we can continue this conversation.
And we certainly will.
Okay.
Thank you all so much for tuning in. We will see you all next week.
Yeah.
Bye.